I stood there, my champagne glass trembling in my hand, as Jessica's voice echoed through the ballroom. Maybe Madison's just bitter because she'll never be the kind of woman my brother deserves. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my ears burn and my heart pound in my chest. I scanned the room. Eric was laughing along, his mother Diane smirking behind her wine glass, and all the eyes at Oak Valley Country Club turned to me, the jealous wife who supposedly didn't measure up. 3 years of silence, 3 years of writing checks, 3 years of swallowing my pride while they spent my money and mocked me behind designer handbags and country club memberships. But something broke inside me that night. Not just the champagne glass that slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble floor, though that did make everyone turn and stare. Something deeper. The invisible chain that had kept me quiet, kept me paying, kept me hoping that one day I might be good enough for the illustrious McAllister family. "Oh, Madison," Jessica said with exaggerated concern, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Seems like you've had a little too much to drink again." I hadn't. I'd been nursing the same glass all evening, too anxious about the impending $8,500 catering bill to indulge. Another expense they'd assured me was just what McAllisters do for milestone birthdays. I knelt down to pick up the broken glass, and a server rushed over with a small brush and dustpan. "Let me handle that, ma'am," he said quietly. "Thank you," I whispered, standing up slowly. The room had already moved on, the wealthy guests of Charlotte's elite returning to their conversations about summer homes and boarding schools. Nobody noticed the envelope in my clutch. Nobody knew what I was about to do. I made my way to the stage where the jazz quartet was taking a break. The microphone stood empty, waiting, just like I had been waiting for 3 years. For acknowledgement, for respect, for some sign that I wasn't just an ATM with a wedding ring. "Can I borrow this for a moment?" I asked the saxophone player, who nodded and stepped aside. I tapped the microphone twice, the sound cutting through the ambient chatter. Heads turned. Eric looked up from his conversation with his college friends, confusion crossing his handsome face. Jessica froze. Mid-laugh, champagne flute raised as if in a perpetual toast. "I'd like to make an announcement," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Since it's Eric's birthday, I think it's time for some gifts to be acknowledged." Diane, my mother-in-law, smiled tightly. She probably thought I was going to announce the luxury watch I'd bought Eric, with my own money, of course. The one she'd suggested, after casually mentioning that a McAllister man deserves a timepiece with history. Instead, I reached into my clutch and pulled out the envelope. "You think I'm jealous?" I said, looking directly at Jessica. "Let's talk about what jealousy looks like, and what $87,000 in silence actually means." The room went so quiet I could hear the ice melting in abandoned drinks. "This party?" I continued, opening the envelope. "Your designer dress? The venue? The apartment you moved into after your breakup? All paid for. By me." Jessica's face drained of color. Diane's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. "And my husband, Eric?" He sat frozen, like he'd just seen a ghost. But I wasn't a ghost. For the first time since I'd married into this family, I was fully present, fully visible, and I wasn't going to disappear again. I met Eric McAllister during my final year of graduate school. I was working on my master's in nonprofit finance, dreaming of helping community organizations maximize their impact. He was volunteering at a charity auction, though I later learned he was only there because his firm encouraged community visibility. Eric was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my passion for financial equity. When he asked me out for coffee, I said yes without hesitation. When that coffee turned into dinner, and dinner turned into weekend trips to the coast, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who valued me for exactly who I was. The first time I met Diane McAllister, she asked where I summered as a child. "Charlotte," I replied. "We didn't really go anywhere." "Oh," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "How grounding." I should have recognized the warning sign. But love makes you blind to red flags, doesn't it? And I loved Eric, loved his laugh, his ambition, the way he talked about building a future together. When he proposed 6 months later, I said yes through happy tears. When Diane insisted on planning the wedding. "McAllisters have traditions to uphold, dear," I agreed, wanting to make a good impression. When the bill for the rehearsal dinner mysteriously landed in my inbox, just a mix-up with the accounts, I paid it without question. That was the beginning. A $4,700 dinner that I covered from my savings, meant for a down payment on a small home someday. I thought it was a one-time thing. I was wrong. After we returned from our honeymoon, which I later discovered I had primarily financed, the requests began in earnest. Diane needed help with property taxes on their lake house. Jessica's car lease was expiring. Eric's father wanted to invest in a friend's startup, but was temporarily liquid poor. Each time, Eric would approach me with that apologetic smile. "It's just until the trust rebalances," he'd say. Or, "Dad's portfolio is tied up in some complicated stuff right now." I believed him. I believed in family supporting family. I believed that maybe, if I helped enough, if I gave enough, they would finally see me as one of them. Meanwhile, I took the job at Charlotte Community Foundation, making a solid but unspectacular salary. I budgeted carefully, postponed my student loan payments, and picked up consulting work on weekends, all while Diane hosted luncheons where she introduced me as Eric's wife. She works in charity. Tonight was supposed to be different. Eric's 40th birthday, a milestone. I'd saved for months to buy him that watch, hoping it would be the gesture that finally earned me a place at the McAllister table. Instead, I got Jessica's thinly veiled insults and the final confirmation that I would never be enough. Not because of who I was, but because of what they thought I lacked: pedigree, connections, the right kind of ambition. As I stood on that stage, document in hand, I realized something else. I didn't want to be enough for them anymore. I wanted to be enough for me. And that started right now. "Madison, get down from there," Eric hissed, finally breaking his stunned silence. He was smiling tightly at the guests. That practiced McAllister smile that could mean anything from mild annoyance to murderous rage. I ignored him and unfolded the first page of my meticulously documented financial history with the McAllister family. April 12th, 2022, I read clearly. Paid $23,000 for Jessica's apartment security deposit and first 6 months' rent at the Wilshire after her breakup with Tyler. I looked up at Jessica, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You told everyone you landed on your feet after he cheated? You never mentioned who cushioned your fall." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jessica's friends, the ones who'd spent the evening whispering behind manicured hands whenever I walked by, were suddenly very interested in their phones. June 8th, 2022, I continued. $1,250 to help Diane refinance her condo when she couldn't risk a bad credit report during the board position application at the Charlotte Arts Council. Diane stepped forward. "Madison, this is completely inappropriate." December 15th, 2022, I cut her off. $18,000 deposit on Oak Valley Country Club for tonight's event, plus another $8,500 due tomorrow for the remainder of the catering and staff. The club manager, Mr. Kavanaugh, who had been hovering near the bar, suddenly became very interested in straightening the napkins. "Madison!" Eric was out of his chair now, moving toward the stage with purpose. I could see the panic in his eyes, not concern for me, but fear of exposure, fear that his carefully cultivated image was crumbling in front of Charlotte's elite. I raised my hand to stop him. "And countless smaller payments," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "Designer dresses, spa weekends, even a $600 bottle of champagne for the family toast tonight. The same family that has spent 3 years treating me like I'm not good enough to bear the McAllister name." Eric reached the stage, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You're embarrassing yourself," he whispered harshly as he reached for the microphone. I stepped back. "No, Eric. For the first time since I met you, I'm not embarrassing myself. I'm standing up for myself." The truth was, I had enabled this situation. I had been so desperate for acceptance that I'd allowed myself to become the family bank without the family benefits. The realization hit me with startling clarity. I wasn't just mad at them. I was mad at myself. Monica, my best friend from college, had warned me. We'd met for coffee 6 months ago, the only time in weeks I'd managed to see anyone from my pre-McAllister life. "Maddie," she'd said, stirring her latte with genuine concern in her eyes, "when was the last time you did something for yourself? Just you?" I couldn't answer. Between work, the McAllister social obligations, and the constant financial drainage, I'd lost track of myself. "They're not asking," Monica had said gently. "They're using you." I'd defended them then, made excuses, insisted that family helps family. But standing on that stage, watching Eric's carefully constructed facade begin to crack, I knew Monica had been right all along. I thought giving quietly would earn me love, I said, no longer reading from my notes but speaking from my heart. Instead, it made me invisible, a walking checkbook with no voice. The room was dead silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving, trays of appetizers suspended in midair. Eric grabbed my arm. "That's enough," he said through clenched teeth. "We'll discuss this at home." I pulled away from him. "There's nothing left to discuss, Eric, and nothing left to pay for." I handed him the envelope containing every receipt, every transfer, every record of financial support I'd provided to his family. "Happy birthday," I said quietly. "Consider this my last gift." I stepped off the stage, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The sound echoed in the stunned silence. As I passed Jessica, she reached out as if to stop me. "Madison, you can't just—" "I already did," I replied, not breaking stride. I walked past Diane, who was already on her phone, no doubt trying to contain the damage, past Eric's father, who had the decency to look ashamed, past the tables of Charlotte's finest, who would be talking about this night for years to come. At the door, I paused and turned back. Eric stood where I'd left him, the envelope hanging limply from his hand, his birthday celebration in ruins around him. For a moment, I felt a twinge of regret, not for what I'd done, but for what could have been, for the marriage I'd thought we had, for the love I'd believed in. Then I stepped out into the warm Charlotte night, taking my first breath as a woman who had finally found her voice. I drove home in silence, the enormity of what I'd just done washing over me in waves. I'd publicly exposed the McAllister family's financial dependence on me. I'd humiliated my husband on his 40th birthday. I'd burned bridges that could never be rebuilt. And yet, I felt lighter than I had in years. When I pulled into our driveway, the house we'd bought in the right neighborhood with mostly my down payment, I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in the car and called Monica. "I did it," I said when she answered. "I told them everything." There was a pause, then Monica's voice, warm with pride. "Where are you? Do you need a place to stay?" That's when the tears finally came. Not tears of sadness or regret, but of relief, of recognition. Someone saw me, really saw me for the first time in years. "Yes," I whispered. "I think I do." Monica's guest bedroom became my sanctuary that night. I sat cross-legged on her floral comforter, phone buzzing relentlessly beside me. 27 missed calls from Eric, 14 from Jessica, 5 from Diane. I silenced them all. "You need to eat something," Monica said, appearing in the doorway with a mug of tea and a sandwich. Her apartment was modest, a far cry from the McAllister mansion, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd been in years. "I'm not hungry," I replied, though I accepted the tea gratefully. The adrenaline from my public revelation was wearing off, leaving me hollow and exhausted. "Well, you need strength for whatever comes next," she insisted, setting the plate beside me. "And from the way your phone is lighting up, something's definitely coming." She wasn't wrong. At 2:13 a.m., the doorbell rang. Monica peered through the peephole and turned to me with wide eyes. "It's Eric," she whispered. My heart raced, but I nodded. "Let him in." Eric McAllister, with his tailored suit now rumpled and his perfectly styled hair disheveled, stormed into Monica's living room like he owned it. Typical. The McAllisters entered every room as if it existed for their convenience. "Have you lost your mind?" he demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I told the truth, Eric. Something this family seems allergic to." His laugh was bitter, cutting. "The truth? You humiliated me in front of everyone who matters. In Charlotte. My clients were there, my boss, my father's business partners. Of course, his reputation was all that concerned him, not the fact that I'd been silently bankrolling his family for years. You humiliated yourself," I replied quietly, "by allowing your family to drain me financially while treating me like an outsider." He paced Monica's small living room, running his hands through his hair. "This is ridiculous. So you helped out a few times. That's what family does." "A few times?" I stood up, anger surging through my exhaustion. "Eric, I've paid nearly $90,000 to your family in 3 years. Money I earned, money from my savings, my inheritance from my grandmother, my retirement fund." "It wasn't like that," he protested, but his eyes shifted away from mine. "He knew. He'd always known." "Then what was it like?" I pressed. Explain it to me, Eric. Explain how your sister hasn't paid her own rent in 2 years. How your mother's credit cards are maxed out despite her family money. How your father's investments always need just a little boost from our joint account. Eric's face hardened. You're making it sound like we stole from you. You agreed to help. You signed those checks willingly. Because I thought I was building something with you. My voice broke slightly. I thought if I just gave enough, did enough, your family would finally see me as worthy of being a McAllister. But that was never going to happen, was it? He looked away, and in that moment of avoidance, I had my answer. You should come home, he said finally, his tone softening, to that persuasive cadence he used on clients. We can work through this. My parents are willing to forgive your outburst if you issue a public apology. Blame it on stress, maybe medication. We can fix this. A laugh escaped me, sharp and incredulous. Fix this? You want me to apologize for telling the truth? To pretend I'm unstable or medicated? Monica, who had been silently watching from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward. I think you should leave, Eric. He glared at her. This is between me and my wife. Your wife is my friend, Monica replied evenly. And she's staying here tonight. Eric turned back to me, his expression calculated. Madison, be reasonable. Where will you go? What will you do? Your reputation in Charlotte will be ruined after tonight. The threat was clear. Come back, play your role, or be ostracized. The McAllisters had social power, connections in every industry in town. They could make things difficult for me professionally, personally. But standing there in Monica's apartment, looking at the man I'd married, really seeing him perhaps for the first time, I realized something profound. I didn't care anymore. I'll go somewhere new, I said, simply. And I'll do whatever I want, with my own money, on my own terms. His face darkened. This isn't over. It is for me, I replied. I'll send someone for my things tomorrow. After Eric left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle Monica's framed photos, we sat in silence for a long moment. Then Monica reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, she said softly. Tears welled in my eyes. I don't know what happens next. You don't have to know tonight, she assured me. Tonight, you just have to breathe. So I did. I breathed through the panic and the uncertainty. I breathed through the texts that kept lighting up my phone, Jessica alternating between rage and false concern, Diane suggesting mental health resources, Eric making vague threats about joint accounts. I'd figure it all out tomorrow. Tonight I had tea, a friend who saw me clearly, and for the first time in years, the weight of the McAllister expectations was lifted from my shoulders. The next morning, I woke to an email from my boss at the Charlotte Community Foundation. The subject line read simply, Coffee? Linda Peterson had been my mentor since I joined the foundation. A sharp-minded woman, in her 60s with a no-nonsense approach to nonprofit finance, and a surprising collection of vintage brooches, she was the last person I expected to be involved in my marital drama. We met at a small cafe far from the upscale neighborhoods the McAllisters frequented. Linda was already there when I arrived, 2 steaming mugs on the table before her. Well, she said as I slid into the chair, across from her. I hear you made quite an impression at Oak Valley last night. My stomach dropped. Linda, She held up a hand. Madison, I've known Diane McAllister for 20 years. She's served on half the charitable boards in this city, always ensuring her name appears prominently in the donor lists, while contributing the bare minimum. I blinked, surprised by her candor. What I'm saying, Linda continued, stirring her coffee thoughtfully, is that while your approach might have lacked subtlety, I can't say I disapprove of someone finally calling out the Emperor's new clothes. Relief washed over me. So you're not firing me? She laughed. Firing you? Good heavens, no. In fact, I have a proposition for you. She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Our Denver office needs a new financial director. Clean slate, bigger responsibility, 15% salary increase. I stared at the folder, then back at Linda. Denver? I've been considering you for the position for months, but frankly, I wasn't sure you'd ever leave Charlotte, or the McAllisters. She leaned forward. Sometimes the universe has a way of creating exactly the opening we need, exactly when we need it. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the cafe, a future began to take shape, one I'd never allowed myself to imagine. A future where I wasn't defined by my marriage or measured by my in-laws' approval. A future of my own making. When would they need me to start? I asked, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling within me. Linda smiled. How fast can you pack? Denver greeted me with clear mountain air and endless blue skies. My apartment, my name alone on the lease, overlooked a small park where locals walked their dogs and children played regardless of the season. The rent was reasonable, especially compared to the mortgage I'd been mostly paying on the Charlotte house. Eric had been furious when I told him I wouldn't be contributing to it anymore. You can't just walk away from our financial commitments, he'd argued during one of our tense phone calls. The house, the club membership, the investments we made together. I'm not walking away from our commitments, I'd replied. I'm walking away from being the only one committed to them. The divorce proceedings began almost immediately. Eric hired an aggressive attorney who specialized in high net worth separations, though the irony of the McAllisters presenting themselves as high net worth while borrowing money from me wasn't lost on anyone. My own attorney, a pragmatic woman named Helen Cho, reviewed my financial documentation with raised eyebrows. You've kept meticulous records, she observed, flipping through the same papers I'd displayed at the country club. Smart woman. I'm in finance, I shrugged. Record-keeping is second nature. What I didn't tell her was that I'd started documenting the transfers almost from the beginning. Not because I planned to expose them, but because some part of me needed proof. Proof that I was contributing. Proof that I existed in this marriage beyond my checking account. My new job at the Denver Community Foundation consumed my days in the best possible way. I was responsible for overseeing the financial health of dozens of grassroots organizations working to make meaningful change in their communities. The work was challenging, rewarding, and most importantly, valued. Linda checked in regularly, not just as my former boss, but as a friend. How's the altitude treating you? She'd ask, though we both knew she was really asking about my state of mind. I'm breathing easier every day, I'd reply, and it was true in more ways than one. 6 weeks after my move, a package arrived at my office. No return address, just a small padded envelope containing a single thumb drive and a note in familiar handwriting. You might need this. M. Monica. My heart raced as I plugged the drive into my computer. It contained hundreds of photos, images from Jessica's social media accounts spanning the past 3 years, photos of her in designer clothes I'd paid for, at events I'd funded, in the apartment I'd secured, all captioned with variations of the same theme. Blessed, self-made, hard work pays off. The final image was different, a screenshot of a private message Jessica had sent Monica just days. After my departure from Charlotte, I know you're hiding her. Tell Madison she can't run from family. We'll be in touch when she's ready to make amends for her behavior. I deleted the thumb drive's contents and tossed it in the trash. I didn't need digital reminders of the life I'd left behind. The occasional texts from Eric were reminder enough, alternating between cold legal demands and moments of apparent tenderness designed to pull me back into orbit around the McAllister sun. The house feels empty without you, he wrote one night, when I knew he'd had just enough bourbon to loosen his grip on his pride. Find someone new to pay your bills, I replied, then blocked his number. It wasn't easy. There were nights I stared at the ceiling of my new bedroom, questioning everything. Had I overreacted? Should I have tried harder to make the marriage work? Was I punishing Eric for his family's behavior? But then I'd remember the laughter at the country club, the smirking, the constant subtle reminders that I wasn't quite McAllister material. And I'd remember the lightness I felt walking out those doors, reclaiming my worth not in dollars spent, but in truth finally spoken. 3. Months after moving to Denver, I received a formal settlement offer from Eric's lawyer. In exchange for a quick, quiet divorce, Eric would take full responsibility for the Charlotte house and all associated debts. I would keep my retirement accounts and personal savings. No alimony, no further financial entanglements. Helen called to discuss the offer. It's surprisingly reasonable, she noted, especially given how things started. They want this over quickly, I said, understanding dawning. The longer this drags on, the more opportunity for financial details to become public record. Helen chuckled. I suspect Diane McAllister wouldn't survive having her credit card statements entered into evidence. I signed the papers that afternoon, not because I wanted to protect the McAllisters, but because I wanted to be free, truly free. That evening, I walked to the park across from my apartment and sat on a bench, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. A woman about my age sat down beside me, a friendly golden retriever at her feet. New to the neighborhood? She asked, offering a smile. Relatively, I replied. Moved here a few months ago from North Carolina. Big change, she observed. What brought you to Denver? 3 months ago, I might have hedged. Might have offered some vague explanation about career opportunities or a fresh start. But sitting there in the fading light, watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand, I felt no need to hide my truth. I needed to remember who I was, I said simply, outside of someone else's expectations. She nodded as if this made perfect sense. Well, Denver's good for that. The altitude has a way of giving you perspective. We chatted easily after that, about the neighborhood, local restaurants, hiking trails I should try. Normal conversation untainted by social climbing or familial judgment. When she invited me to join her book club the following week, I surprised myself by saying, yes. As I walked back to my apartment, phone buzzing with a text from an unknown number, Jessica using a friend's phone to bypass my blocks, I realized something profound. The price of my freedom had been $87,000, plus the years I'd spent trying to be someone I wasn't. But what I'd gained in return was priceless. Denver winter settled over the city like a blanket, crisp, clean, and surprisingly comforting. 6 months had passed since I'd left Charlotte, and my life had taken on a rhythm entirely my own. My apartment now felt like home, decorated with pieces I'd chosen for myself, rather than to impress the McAllisters. My work at the Denver Community Foundation was flourishing, with 2 major grant initiatives already under my belt. I was sitting at my desk reviewing financial projections, when my assistant, Trevor, knocked on my doorframe. "There's someone here to see you," he said, his expression carefully neutral. "Says she's family." My heart stuttered. Had Jessica or Diane tracked me down? I'd been careful about keeping my address private, but the McAllisters had connections. "Did she give a name?" I asked, already planning escape routes. "Diane McAllister," Trevor replied. "Should I tell her you're in a meeting?" I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Confrontation wasn't my favorite sport, but I'd already proven I could hold my own. Besides, curiosity prickled at the back of my neck. What could possibly bring Diane to Denver? "Send her in," I said finally. "But stay close." Trevor nodded, understanding the unspoken request for backup. Diane McAllister entered. My office like she was arriving at a royal audience. Camel haircoat, pearls, Hermes scarf, the uniform of Southern old money, completely out of place among Denver's casual mountain chic. But something was different. The usual confident tilt of her chin was missing, replaced by a tightness around her eyes I'd never seen before. "Madison," she said, her voice carrying that familiar Charlotte drawl. "You look, well, thank you," I replied, not offering her a seat. "What brings you to Denver?" She glanced at the chair across from my desk, then back at me. With a small sigh, I gestured for her to sit. "I'll be direct," she said, settling into the chair and arranging her coat. "The McAllister Foundation is in trouble." I blinked, momentarily confused. "The McAllister Foundation?" "Our family. Charity," she clarified. "The one that supports arts education across the Carolinas." I knew of it, of course. It was Diane's pride and joy, a tax-advantaged vehicle that allowed her to attend galas and command respect in Charlotte's philanthropic circles. What I didn't know was that it had actual financial substance. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, professional curiosity overriding personal history. Diane's perfectly manicured hands fidgeted with her scarf. "Financial irregularities. The board is asking questions I can't answer. There's talk of an audit." I leaned back in my chair. "And this concerns me how, exactly?" "You're good with numbers," she said, as if it were obvious. "Better than good, according to Linda Peterson. You understand nonprofit finance in a way. In a way the McAllisters never bothered to learn," I finished for her. Color rose in her cheeks, but she didn't deny it. "We need your help, Madison. The foundation does real good work. Children who would never see the inside of a theater get to experience Shakespeare. Rural schools get music programs. It's not just about the McAllister name." For the first time since I'd known her, Diane sounded sincere. Still, suspicion lingered. "Why not hire a consultant? There are plenty of nonprofit financial advisors in Charlotte." She looked away, staring out my office window at the snow-capped mountains in the distance. "It's complicated. The foundation's finances have been intermingled with personal accounts." Understanding dawned. "You've been using the foundation as a personal piggy bank." "Not me," she said quickly. "Richard, my husband." A flash of vulnerability crossed her face. "I didn't know until recently. He's been siphoning funds for years to cover investment losses. If this becomes public, the McAllister reputation would be destroyed. Their social standing in Charlotte would evaporate overnight. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spent years worrying about appearances while the foundation was being hollowed out from within. Again, I said carefully, why come to me, after everything that happened? Diane met my eyes directly for the first time. Because you're the only one who already knows the worst about us. And because despite what you might think of me, of all of us, those programs matter. The children they serve matter. I studied her face, looking for the manipulation, the angle. But all I saw was exhaustion, and something I'd never associated with Diane McAllister. Fear. Where's Eric in all this? I asked, the question emerging before I could stop it. Eric doesn't know, she admitted. He and Jessica think I'm at a spa retreat in Arizona. Richard is the only other person who knows I'm here. The admission surprised me. Diane had always been a united front with her husband, presenting perfect McAllister solidarity to the world. If I were to help, I said slowly, it wouldn't be for the McAllister name. It would be for the programs and the children they serve. Hope flickered across her face. Of course. And I would need complete transparency. Every account, every transaction, every decision. Yes, she agreed quickly. And I added, I would need to be compensated fairly for my time and expertise. This is a professional consultation, not a family favor. She nodded, relief evident in the loosening of her shoulders. Name your price. I named a figure that made her eyes widen, high but fair for the complexity of the work and the discomfort of dealing with the McAllisters again. That's substantial, she said, carefully. So is embezzlement from a nonprofit, I countered. She flinched but nodded. Agreed. As she left my office, contact information and preliminary meeting scheduled, I sat back in my chair, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. Trevor appeared in the doorway moments later. Everything okay? He asked. I smiled wryly. I think I just agreed to save the people who spent years, making me feel worthless. Why would you do that? He asked, genuinely puzzled. I thought about the children Diane had mentioned, kids from backgrounds like mine, getting opportunities I never had. Because sometimes the work matters more than the people behind it. That night I called Monica. You did what? She exclaimed when I told her about Diane's visit. Madison, these people drained you. Emotionally and financially for years. They don't deserve your help. I'm not helping them, I replied. I'm helping the foundation and the people it serves, and charging handsomely for the privilege. Monica sighed. Just be careful. Wounded McAllisters might be more dangerous than confident ones. Her warning stayed with me as I boarded a plane to Charlotte the following week. I'd insisted on working remotely as much as possible, but some on-site review was necessary. The foundation's headquarters were in a historic building downtown, far from the McAllister residence and the country club circuit. Small mercies. As I walked through the foundation's modest offices, reviewing program materials and meeting the small dedicated staff, I realized something surprising. This wasn't just a vanity project. The McAllister Foundation was doing genuine good in communities across the Carolinas. Children who might never see live theater were attending performances. Schools without music budgets were receiving instruments and instruction. The irony was palpable. The same family that had treated me like an outsider for years was funding programs designed to make arts accessible to everyone. But the financial records told a different story. Richard McAllister had indeed been using the foundation as his personal ATM, covering investment losses and maintaining the family's lavish lifestyle. The numbers didn't lie. The foundation was months away from insolvency unless drastic measures were taken. The conference room at the McAllister Foundation felt smaller than it actually was, perhaps, because of the tension filling every corner. Richard McAllister sat at the head of the table, his once commanding presence diminished by the financial documents spread before him. Diane sat to his right, her usual perfect posture now rigid with anxiety. The foundation's board members, 5 of Charlotte's most respected community leaders, occupied the remaining seats, their expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed anger. And then there was me, standing at the front of the room beside a projection screen, about to deliver news that would change the McAllister legacy forever. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. I've completed my review of the foundation's finances, and I'm ready to present my findings and recommendations. Richard cleared his throat. Before you begin, Madison, I want to thank you for your discretion in this matter. It speaks to your character that you've agreed to help despite past disagreements. Past disagreements. Such a polite way to describe years of condescension and financial exploitation. I nodded without comment and turned to my presentation. The McAllister Foundation is currently facing a deficit of $1.3 million, I stated plainly. A collective gasp rippled through the room. This deficit is the result of systematic fund diversion over the past 5 years. The board chairman, Dr. Walker, leaned forward. Diversion to where exactly? I clicked to the next slide. A flowchart showing transfers from the foundation to various shell companies and finally to Richard McAllister's personal accounts. The foundation's endowment has been used to cover personal investment losses, maintain lifestyle expenses, and fund various family members' needs. My eyes flickered briefly to Diane, who was staring fixedly at the table. Without immediate intervention, the foundation will be insolvent within 3 months. The room erupted in questions and accusations. Dr. Walker demanded explanations from Richard. 2 board members began discussing legal implications. Another mentioned the word prosecution. Richard McAllister, the man who had looked down on me for years for my modest background, now sat silent, his face ashen. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction, only a strange emptiness. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. If I may, I interrupted the chaos. I've outlined a recovery plan that could save the foundation and its programs. The room quieted, all eyes returning to me. The foundation's programs are valuable and effective, I continued. The children they serve shouldn't pay the price for financial mismanagement. I believe there's a path forward that protects the mission while addressing the breach of trust. My proposed plan was straightforward but demanding. Richard would need to liquidate personal assets to repay the foundation. The board would implement strict financial controls. The McAllister family would step back from operational control while maintaining their name on the foundation. And most critically, all financial irregularities would be disclosed to major donors in a controlled, transparent manner. Transparency? Richard finally spoke, his voice hoarse. That would destroy us. Hiding embezzlement will destroy you more completely, I replied evenly, and it will take the foundation down with you. Dr. Walker nodded slowly. Madison's right. We have a fiduciary duty here that goes beyond protecting the McAllister name. The meeting continued for hours, with the board eventually voting to adopt my recommendations with minor modifications. As people filed out, Diane approached me, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. You could have buried us, she said quietly. That was certainly within your power today. I shook my head. That was never my goal. What is your goal, Madison? She asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Why help us at all? I considered the question carefully. Because doing the right thing matters more to me than getting even. Always has. She nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. I think I never really knew you at all. No, I agreed. You didn't try to. As I packed up my materials, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously, then froze when I saw the message. Heard you're in town. We need to talk. Eric. I stared at the screen, conflicting emotions washing over me. The divorce was finalized, the financial ties severed. What could we possibly have left to discuss? Against my better judgment, I replied, The Cotswold Coffee Shop, 10 a.m. tomorrow. When I arrived at the coffee shop the next morning, Eric was already there, occupying a corner table with 2 cups. He stood when he saw me, uncertainty flickering across his face, a far cry from the confident, entitled man I'd married. I ordered your usual, he said as I sat down. Still a latte with an extra shot? I nodded, surprised he remembered. Thank you. An awkward silence settled between us. Eric looked different, thinner, with new lines around his eyes. The divorce had aged him. I heard you're helping the foundation, he finally said. News travels fast, I observed, taking a sip of my latte. Charlotte's a small town when it matters. He paused, then added, I didn't know about what my father was doing. I swear, Madison. I believe you, I said, and surprisingly, I did. Eric had many faults, but financial manipulation wasn't one of them. He'd left that to his parents. Why are you helping them? He asked, genuine confusion in his voice. After everything they put you through, everything we put you through, why come back? The question echoed Diane's from the day before, but coming from Eric, it carried different weight. I studied his face, looking for traces of the man I'd fallen in love with years ago. The foundation does good work, I said simply. The programs matter. Eric shook his head. That's not all of it. He was right, of course. I'm helping because it allows me to leave Charlotte on my terms, not running away, not pushed out, just choosing a different path. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're reclaiming your narrative. I nodded, surprised by his insight. Something like that. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if he'd been holding them back. For everything. For not seeing what my family was doing to you. For not standing up for you. For laughing that night at the country club. The apology hung in the air between us, sincere but incomplete. The Eric I knew was apologizing for his actions, but not questioning the values that had enabled them. Thank you for saying that, I replied carefully. But Eric, do you understand why? What happened was wrong? Really wrong? He frowned slightly. Of course. We took advantage of your generosity. It wasn't about the money, I said, leaning forward. It was about respect. About seeing me as a full person with value beyond what I could provide to the McAllister family. Eric looked down at his coffee, discomfort evident in the set of his shoulders. I did value you, Madison. In my way. Your way wasn't enough, I said gently, for either of us. We finished our coffees in silence, the gap between us wider than the small table that separated us. As we stood to leave, Eric hesitated. Are you happy? In Denver? The question surprised me with its simplicity and its sincerity. I thought about my apartment overlooking the park, my fulfilling work, the book club I'd joined, the hiking group that was slowly becoming friends. I'm becoming happy, I answered truthfully. I'm becoming myself. He nodded, a flash of genuine regret crossing his face. That's good. You deserve that. As I watched him walk away, I felt the last threads of our shared past finally unraveling, the closure I hadn't known I needed. Outside the coffee shop, Charlotte continued its busy morning. Rhythm, oblivious to the small moment of recognition that had just transpired. I checked my watch. 3 hours until my flight back to Denver, back to my new life. I decided to walk, retracing familiar streets with new eyes. The city felt different now, smaller, less intimidating. Or perhaps I was the one who had changed, grown too large for the box the McAllisters had tried to keep me in. Either way, I was ready to go home. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly where that was. 1 year after my confrontation at the Oak Valley Country Club, I stood on my balcony in Denver, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and gold. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, Linda Peterson's name flashing on the screen. The news just broke, she said when I answered, her voice a mix of amazement and satisfaction. Have you seen it? Not yet, I replied, though I knew exactly what she was referring to. CNN, Charlotte Observer, Wall Street Journal, they're all running the story. McAllister Foundation announces major restructuring after financial review. They're calling it a model of nonprofit transparency and accountability. I smiled to myself. The press release had been carefully crafted over weeks of negotiations, honest about the past mismanagement while focusing on the foundation's renewed commitment to its mission. And the best part, Linda continued, is that the children's programs are not only continuing, but expanding. 3 new counties added to the theater program, and the music initiative doubling its reach. That had been non-negotiable in my recovery plan. The foundation would admit to its financial irregularities, but the services to underserved communities would not just survive, they would thrive. What about the McAllisters? I asked, though I already knew much of the answer. Richard resigned from the board, as expected. Diane is staying on, but in a non-executive role. The new director is that woman from the Arts Council, Patricia. Something? Patricia Jimenez, I supplied. A brilliant arts administrator I'd recommended for the position. Someone with both the vision to grow the programs and the financial discipline to protect them. That's her, Linda confirmed. Word is, she's already secured commitments from 3 major donors who had been on the fence after rumors of financial troubles started circulating. We chatted a bit longer about the foundation's future and my role in saving it. I'd continued consulting remotely after my return to Denver, gradually handing off responsibilities as new systems were implemented and tested. You know, Linda said before hanging up, you took something that could have been purely personal and turned it into professional triumph. Not many people could have done that. After disconnected, I sat with her words, watching as the last light faded from the sky and Denver's city lights began to twinkle. She was right. I could have walked away when Diane appeared in my office that day. Could have relished the McAllisters' downfall from a safe distance. Instead, I'd chosen a different path. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd drained my accounts trying to earn the McAllisters' approval. In the end, they'd come to me empty-handed, and I'd help them anyway. Not for approval, but because it was the right thing to do. The symmetry felt like cosmic justice. My contemplation was interrupted by another call. Monica. "Tell me you've seen Jessica's Instagram," she said without preamble. "I haven't," I replied, laughing at her eagerness. "And I don't follow her anymore, remember?" "Well, allow me to fill you in," Monica continued. "She posted this whole long thing about personal growth and acknowledging past mistakes and, get this, appreciating the people who show up with integrity even when you don't deserve it." I raised an eyebrow, though Monica couldn't see it. "She mentioned me?" "Not by name," Monica clarified, "but anyone who knows the situation knows exactly who she's talking about. The comments are wild. All these Charlotte socialites suddenly developing consciences." I laughed, but the sound held no bitterness. Jessica's public semi-apology meant little to me now. My life had expanded beyond the boundaries of Charlotte's social circles, beyond the need for their validation. "How are the wedding plans coming?" I asked, changing the subject to Monica's upcoming nuptials to her longtime boyfriend. "That's actually my other reason for calling," she said, her voice softening. "I know we talked about you being a bridesmaid, but I was wondering if you'd consider being my maid of honor instead." Emotion caught in my throat. "What about Liz?" I asked, referring to her sister who had been the presumed maid of honor since the engagement announcement. "Liz and I talked," Monica explained, "and we both agreed that after everything this year, after you showed me what real friendship looks like, it should be you standing next to me." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. "I'd be honored," I said simply. After we hung up, I wiped my eyes and looked out at the Denver skyline. A year ago, I'd fled Charlotte feeling like I'd lost everything. My marriage, my social standing, my sense of belonging. Now I understood that I hadn't lost anything of real value. Instead, I'd gained something priceless. Myself. The next morning, I arrived at the Denver Community Foundation offices early, preparing for a board presentation on our latest initiative, a financial literacy program for single parents transitioning to economic independence. As I reviewed my notes, Trevor knocked on my door. "Package for you," he said, placing a small box on my desk. "Courier just dropped it off." I examined the package. No return address, just my name and the foundation's address written in elegant handwriting I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it carefully. Inside was a small velvet jewelry box and a handwritten note on heavy cardstock. I opened the note first. "Madison. These belonged to my grandmother, who built her own life from nothing after coming to this country with little more than determination and dignity. I was saving them for someone in the family who embodied her spirit. I now understand that person is you. With respect and gratitude, Diane McAllister." Stunned, I opened the jewelry box to find a pair of simple but elegant pearl earrings, classic and understated. Not ostentatious like the jewelry the McAllister women typically wore, but something deeper, an heirloom with meaning beyond its monetary value. I sat back in my chair, the note and earrings before me, unsure how to process this unexpected gesture. It wasn't an explicit apology, but from Diane McAllister, this acknowledgement of my worth, separate from my connection to her son, was perhaps more meaningful than any apology could be. I placed the earrings back in their box and tucked them into my desk drawer. I wasn't ready to wear them yet, but I appreciated what they represented. Recognition, finally, of who I had been all along. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. 15 minutes until the board meeting. I gathered my materials, straightened my jacket, and headed to the conference room with confident steps. As I presented my proposal to the board, outlining how we could leverage our resources to create lasting change in vulnerable communities, I felt a profound sense of alignment. This work, this purpose, this version of myself, this was who I was meant to be all along. The board approved the initiative, unanimously. As congratulations flowed around me, my mind briefly flashed back to that night at Oak Valley Country Club. Standing alone with a shattered champagne glass, while the McAllisters laughed at my expense. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. I hadn't just survived leaving Charlotte and the McAllisters behind, I had flourished. The money they had taken from me over the years was just that money. What I had gained in its place was invaluable. Self-respect, purpose, and the knowledge that my worth had never depended on their approval. That evening, I met friends for dinner at a local restaurant. Colleagues from work, members of my hiking group, neighbors from my building, people who knew me simply as Madison, the woman from the community foundation with the ready laugh and thoughtful advice. People who valued me for exactly who I was. As we shared plates and stories, I realized with sudden clarity that I had built something precious here in Denver, a life entirely my own, defined by my choices and values rather than someone else's expectations. The $87,000 I'd spent trying to buy the McAllisters' approval now seemed like tuition for the most important lesson of my life, that dignity and self-worth can never be purchased. They can only be claimed. Spring arrived in Denver with an explosion of wildflowers and fresh possibilities. 2 years had passed since that fateful night at Oak Valley Country Club. 2 years of growth, healing, and rebuilding. My role at the Denver Community Foundation had expanded to Executive Director of Financial Programs, overseeing AGON, initiatives across Colorado that helped communities create sustainable economic futures. I was packing for a weekend hiking trip with friends when my phone rang. An unknown Charlotte area code. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Madison? It's Jessica McAllister." My hand froze midway through folding a sweater. Jessica and I hadn't spoken directly since the night I'd exposed her financial dependence on me. "Jessica?" I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" There was a brief hesitation on the other end. "I'm getting married," she said finally. "Next month." This was unexpected. "Congratulations," I offered, genuinely meaning it. Whatever our past, I held no ill will toward her finding happiness. "Thank you," she replied, then added in a rush, "I'd like you to come to the wedding." I sat down on the edge of my bed, completely thrown. "You want me at your wedding? Jessica, we haven't spoken in 2 years, and the last time we did—" "I know," she interrupted. "I know what happened, and I know my part in it. That's part of why I'm calling." I waited, saying nothing, giving her space to continue. "The thing is," Jessica went on, her voice losing its usual polished edge, "meeting Ryan changed everything for me. He comes from nothing, works as a high school history teacher. My old friends think I'm crazy, marrying someone without prospects. But he's the first person who sees me, really sees me, not as a McAllister, but just as Jessica. The irony wasn't lost on me. And that made you think of me?" "It made me understand you," she corrected. "For the first time, I'm with someone who values me for who I am, not what I represent or what I can provide. And I realized that's all you ever wanted from us. From me." I closed my eyes, absorbing her words. They were surprisingly insightful, coming from the woman who had once mocked me for not being McAllister material. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Jessica continued when I didn't respond. "I don't deserve that, but I am asking for a chance to show you that people can change, that I've changed." I considered her request. 2 years ago, I would have dismissed it as another McAllister manipulation. Now, secure in my own life and choices, I could afford to be generous. "When is the wedding?" I asked. "May 15th, she replied, hope creeping into her voice. "It's small, just family and close friends, at Ryan's parents' backyard in Davidson. Nothing like what my mother wanted, which is kind of the point." I smiled despite myself. A McAllister wedding in a teacher's family backyard. Diane must be beside herself. "I'll check my calendar," I said, not quite committing, but not refusing either. "Can I let you know next week?" "Of course," she agreed quickly. "And Madison, thank you for even considering it." After we hung up, I finished packing, my mind turning over Jessica's invitation. People could change. I knew that better than anyone. I had changed, transformed from a woman desperate for approval into someone secure in her own worth. Was it so hard to believe Jessica might have undergone her own transformation? The following weekend, I found myself driving a rental car down familiar Charlotte streets toward Davidson. I had decided to attend Jessica's wedding after all, not out of obligation or hope of reconciliation, but as acknowledgement that life moves forward, that people evolve, that new chapters begin even after difficult endings. The ceremony was exactly as Jessica had described. Simple, intimate, held in a modestly landscaped backyard with string lights and wildflower centerpieces. Diane was there, dressed more casually than I'd ever seen her, making a visible effort to blend in with Ryan's working-class family. Richard was absent. The fallout from the foundation scandal had apparently included divorce papers as well as financial ruin. Eric was there too, with a date, a woman who laughed easily and wore a sundress that clearly hadn't cost a month's salary. When he saw me, he froze momentarily, then crossed the lawn with careful steps. "Madison," he greeted me, his expression a mix of surprise and something like respect. "I didn't know you were coming. Jessica invited me," I explained. It seemed important to her. He nodded, understanding passing between us. "You look well," he said simply. "Denver agrees with you." "It does," I confirmed. "And you? How are you doing?" A small smile crossed his face. "Better. Different. Learning to live without the family safety net has been educational." I couldn't help but laugh at his understatement. "I imagine so. I've started my own firm," he continued. "Smaller clients, actual work instead of just relationship management. Turns out I'm not terrible at it when I apply myself." "I'm glad," I said, and meant it. Whatever had passed between us, I had never wished him ill. Our conversation was interrupted by Jessica's appearance at my elbow. "You came," she said, genuine pleasure lighting her face. She looked different, softer somehow, her designer clothes and perfect makeup replaced by a simple wedding dress and natural styling. "I did," I agreed. "Congratulations, Jessica. Ryan seems wonderful." "He is," she replied, glancing across the yard where her new husband was laughing with his parents. "He reminds me of you, actually." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Not physically," she clarified with a small laugh, "but in how he moves through the world, with integrity, with purpose, knowing who he is without needing everyone else to validate it." Coming from Jessica, this was high praise indeed. I accepted it with a nod, then offered her the small gift box I'd brought. "It's not much," I said as she opened it. Inside was a simple silver picture frame. But it was something my grandmother gave me when I graduated college. She said it was to hold the moments that remind you who you really are. Jessica's eyes welled with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her fingers tracing the silver edges. "I'll treasure it." As the evening progressed, I found myself surprisingly comfortable among the guests. I chatted with Ryan's mother about her garden, exchanged business cards with his brother who ran a community arts program, and even shared a civil conversation with Diane about the foundation's expanding work. When it was time to leave, Jessica walked me to my car. "I'm sorry," she said abruptly, the words tumbling out as if she'd been holding them back all evening. "For everything. For how I treated you. For the money. For making you feel like you didn't belong." I looked at her in the soft evening light, this new version of Jessica who had apparently found her own path to authenticity. "I forgive you," I said simply. The words came easily, without the weight I might have expected. "We were all different people then." She nodded, relief evident in her face. "Will you keep in touch? Not out of obligation, but I'd like to know how you're doing." I considered her request. "I'd like that," I decided. Not as family, perhaps, but as new acquaintances finding common ground. As I drove back to my hotel, Charlotte's familiar skyline glittering. Against the night sky, I felt a sense of completion. The ledger that had been so unbalanced 2 years ago, $87,000 in silence, years of emotional debt, had finally been settled. Not with money or with vengeance, but with something far more valuable. Truth, growth, and the quiet dignity of moving forward. Back in Denver the following week, I stood on my balcony watching a spring thunderstorm roll over the mountains. My phone buzzed with a text from Monica, including a photo of her wedding invitation, mock-up for my approval as her maid of honor. My coffee table held brochures for a small house I was considering purchasing in a neighborhood near the foundation, my first real home, bought with my own money for my own dreams. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the invisible wife desperately seeking approval to a woman standing firmly in her own power. The McAllisters had taken my money, but they had inadvertently given me something priceless in return, the opportunity to discover my own worth, independent of anyone else's validation. The $87,000 I'd spent trying to buy their acceptance now seemed like the best investment I'd ever made. Not in them, but in The lesson that had set me free. Sometimes the highest price we pay isn't measured in dollars but in dignity. And sometimes the most valuable thing we can recover isn't money, but ourselves. As the first raindrops began to fall, I smiled and whispered the truth I'd finally learned. Sometimes silence isn't grace, it's permission. And the day I stopped paying for their approval was the day I finally bought back my freedom.